FYI.
Great. All right, it looks like we are live. Hi, everyone, and welcome to EIPIP Meeting number 7. Um, the agenda I posted in the group chat, and we'll start with item number 1, the EIP centric model subgroup. Um, I think that was something James brought up a meeting or two ago, and I forgot what that meant.
I think that's probably related to the thing that Jamie also had talked about of having um, like a group of people who are administrating the EIP repo but aren't EIP editors and having a role for them.
Okay, interesting.
That's at least what I remember it as. If someone else other remembers otherwise.
Yeah, I think you're right. I don't know if I was at that meeting, but Um, that sounds like a good idea. So I guess what that would mean is like if you are something else besides an EIP editor, you can still make and push changes to stuff like if you are like your role like the hard fork coordinator or if you are um what else? I don't
Like
know
we could
other
give
roles.
we could like the EIP centric in the EIP centric model EIP rather than spelling out a bunch of names of people in this group, you could say this group is allowed to make edits to this EIP and then have a living EIP or an active EIP that specifies who that is, and then we can give and remove permissions as it makes sense.
Okay.
And then it could also fit like we had the idea we talked about having at the bottom of an EIP the in-house forum. Like if you go to the DMV, there's like the notes that the other side of the table is taking, and there so certain changes in the EIP could be made by this group, but there are things that they wouldn't have access to. So stuff like upgrading processes, like we could have better tracking of the process of an EIP within the EIP itself if we had people who had access to those pieces to make those changes.
Would we be able to make granular enough permission sets within GitHub to do that, or would that be risking people being able to do what they want in the repo?
Granular enough, you just use the EIP auto merge bot to make sure they only touch sections that are laid out specifically for them for to have the permissions.
Wouldn't they have to get like write access to the repo though?
No, the if the EIP auto merger verified that it came from someone in the group and was in a place that they're able to edit, the auto merger can do it. So the same way, like
Oh,
I don't have write access to a repo, but as an author, if I make a change and the bot determines that it fits rules that are okay to merge, it merges it automatically.
okay. What does other people think of this?
Well,
What was that, Brent? You were muted, then unmuted, then muted.
can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear
Yeah,
you now.
sounds like a cool idea.
Yeah, as we start to update the bot, let's look into doing that for sure. I'd say. Anybody else have comments on that one? All right, EFI admin update and process documentation. I don't know. I think that might have been you too, James, or maybe Pooja.
I haven't been here for the last two, so if it was something recent, then it would have been something brought up by someone else.
No, actually, this is coming up from the one of the all core dev calls in which it was suggested that for this EFI process, it might be helpful to have a documentation of that, like how does it work properly, and also if there can be some more admins added to the EFI link, then it would be more updated frequently.
Uh,
So it was coming up from the conversation on Telegram maybe a couple of weeks back. I guess James uh, uh, initiated the conversation. So yeah, that's why it is added in the agenda here.
okay. What does everyone think of that?
I mean, wouldn't it just be adding it to EIP1?
That's kind of my first question. Is I don't know which, do we want it in EIP1 or do we want it in its own place? Because it goes back and forth. It sounds like.
Yeah, I think we need it in its own place. I think EIP1 should be have a level of brevity about it.
So my understanding here is like EFI itself is an EIP. So if we would want to process document the process, we could go ahead and do that. And about the EIP itself, sometimes back we discussed that it should not be a meta, it should be some kind of informational piece, and that should be referred to EIP1. So I'm not sure what the process is agreed upon, but that was the initial proposal.
I like the idea of EFI being its own EIP and then it being mentioned in EIP1 and the status of the EFI EIP to active. So the same status that the EIP1 is, which would mean that it can be changed um, through whatever process is the same as EIP1 being changed, which I think we determined last time we're not entirely sure about.
Yeah, that was the discussion about like it should be an active EIP which is live, and if in future we would want to change, the status can be changed. That was the initial proposal.
Okay. Yeah, so let's make it and make it live. That's a good thing that we can like do today to define the rules of EFI as it relates to core EIPs.
So when you
So
say define the rules, that means specify what is required to be met to be EFI, for an EIP to be EFI.
yes, and it can be very loose if we want it to be, or the EIP author of the EIP if they want that to be a looser thing. Um, and I guess James would be the best person to either do it or advise on it because um, you had a big role in coming up with the EFI process, and I can help too. Um, so for instance, it would just say EFI stands for eligible for inclusion. Um, in order to attain EFI status, the core developers have to come to rough consensus that an EIP is eligible, has a greater than 50% chance of going into a hard fork, something like that. Whatever rough criteria we have defined, because it's still a little loose right now. Um, we don't have a hard number of like X amount of clients have to say this is a good idea, um, or even like what it means to be blessed by an editor, or not an editor, like by a core dev or stuff like that.
So if I have not mistaken, James, I guess you are the author of that EIP, and
Yep.
yeah.
I've been jotting notes about making it more clear. It's the move. It's the going back a little bit to the. I initially wrote it as being a separate thing, and then the EIP was blocked from being merged to draft uh, because Alex wanted it as part of EIP1. So then I started kind of making that change. Um, but that's why it's been in draft for a long time, or it wasn't even merged as draft for a long time because the prerequisite was it shouldn't have any information. It should only contain the the registry of EIPs, and then the rest should be in EIP1. And then I guess I'm saying that as a, I don't know, or a point of frustration when working with EIP editors. I don't really know what to do with all of with
Yeah,
the those with the non-consensus among EIP editors on pretty much whatever's going on.
and if everyone wants it to be an EIP1, like it's not a deal breaker for me as long as it doesn't get too crowded or like how long it can you link to the EIP, James, so I can see how long it is? Because if it's like, to me, the succinctness and the length of it is going to be what would make it better to go in EIP1 versus not better to go to EIP1.
Yeah, I can update. I can send that.
Okay. So I yeah, my main point on that is, And I guess EIP1 can be pretty long. Do other people have different opinions or complementary opinions?
I think if we keep adding to EIP1, it'll get pretty crowded. And isn't it where someone being introduced for the first time to the EIP process goes to?
Yeah, it is. And especially because EFI doesn't relate to 99% of people who are visiting EIP1. That's another argument against it, I think.
Yeah, I had thought of it. So I had originally thought of it as EIP1 being the center of truth for things related to Ethereum, like the EIP process, or just like the governance in general, being as the place that people can reference as the single source of truth. And then the way to you can make it usable by adding in like a table of contents and organizing it very well. So even if it gets long, people can find the information they need quickly. It doesn't really matter how long it gets because you don't need to read the whole thing. You just need to be able to get to what you need to quickly.
That's a good point.
Yeah, I like that.
Yep.
Yeah, it
I can
seems like
also
to me.
but a point against that is it's EIP1 has a really high friction to get anything done on it, and so me being able to update it would be difficult. So having it be separate actually would make it easier to keep up to date with the process.
Yeah, I feel like people would also be able to monitor the changes. So say I care just about the EFI process and it's an informational EIP that's linked in EIP1, then I can just kind of keep track of that EIP, right? And then the link in EIP1 will just always point to that other EIP. And it might be easier, yeah, to make changes that way.
Yeah, that sounds good as long as there's a link to it that EIP1 says the definition for what's required for EFI status is defined over there, so people know there's still a single source of truth.
Yeah. Okay. So, oh, also just as a point, would it be an informational EIP or a meta EIP? Because EIP1 is a meta EIP, I just found out.
It would be a meta EIP.
Okay.
I think anything related to that, the governance of stuff should be meta.
Yeah,
Like processes should be meta.
like self-referential EIP processes. Got it. Um, let's see.
I did have some other thoughts on things that the EIP center that the EFI list could be used for, or like the process of EFI could be useful for other things. If you look at it from the core devs have consensus to say this is a good idea to move forward with as long as it continues to make sense. Edits to, like, for example, yesterday when it came up, the PR for changing Tim's PR for changing the names from hard forks to network upgrades. Like, that's a PR. It's not an EIP. I don't think it should be an EIP, but it should be there should be some way of, like that the core devs said they're okay with it, then could be added as part of it's eligible for inclusion, quote unquote, kind of expanding the definition a little bit. But then could be a way to then make that into draft and then have it be last call, and then use that as like, these are lists of PRs and things that are governance, that are like process related, that have gone through the system.
Yeah. Okay. I like that. I almost want to just push EIP1 through the changes and then have part of EIP1 saying editors have to be this active and they have to be involved with EIP1 updates. Because like we have gotten hardly any editor involvement, and like I'm guessing they're going to not be happy if we push EIP1 changes through just without consulting them, even though they haven't been here.
Yeah.
So, I don't know how to tackle that one yet. I'll have to think about it. But that's
we could start by at least recording that it's been blessed, quote unquote, by the core dev call and the core devs that are on it.
Yeah. For the
and
network
reporting that somewhere.
for the network upgrade thing, I think that's one thing where it's gotten enough coverage that it and so few detractors that we can go forward with it.
I disagree with that one though, because like I posted it on Twitter, and I think 100% of the reaction from the community has been negative. So
Yeah, I guess you're right. I didn't look closely at your Twitter post.
yeah. So, anyways, it's kind of a sidetrack, but I wouldn't be comfortable pushing it through at this point.
Cool. Um, Sorry, we were on. I think we got on some tangents, James. What was the main point for the EIP? Yeah,
EFI,
EFI.
where it sits, like process and functionally, and then adding people to it. I don't know. I think we kind of got to the end of the discussion. The
Yeah,
rest were kind of an addendum.
I think next steps on that would be it's kind of up to you since you're writing it if you wanted an EIP one or if you want to try to push it separately. Um, so I think that's kind of your decision, but it's good that you're getting input from everyone, and it could go either way. I'm leaning more toward it being separately personally for the reasons that we've talked about,
Yeah.
because it could be updated easier, because um, it doesn't have to, it wouldn't clutter EIP1 unnecessarily, and a few other things. Okay, any other comments on that? Anybody? All right, the next one is number 3, EIP best practices, EIP 2565. I think this is a carryover from the last time, but all this is, all we're saying by this item, if I recall, is to say this is a really good example of an EIP that we should reference an EIP 1 as like an ideal core EIP.
Yeah, that's about right. Like it's a carryover item, and yes, this is what was discussed in the last meeting, I guess.
Okay, anybody else have comments on this? Okay, the EIP migration to Ethereum.org, um, that kind of fizzled for the most part. We have an EIP page on there now, um, I think, but I don't know. I think we ended up like basically coming to rough consensus over time that it's not a good idea to move things from eips.ethereum.org to ethereum.org/eips because although there would be SEO benefits, uh, it would be what was the reasoning? Go
They
ahead.
are they are planning to add the search button to it. I have just added the link in the chat. So it's about adding the search button to the existing one, and hopefully that would be helpful. Depending upon the results, it would be decided or discussed further. Should we go ahead and migrate the entire data, or should we keep it the way it is as of now? So that's the PR open for comments. So uh, feel free to add comments about it.
As long as we're not drastically changing the site, adding search is great. I just don't want that to come with like moving all the EIPs over to Sam's Ethereum.org implementation yet until it's agreed upon, if it does get agreed upon. But I don't think we're there yet, right?
And it seems out of scope for Ethereum.org. Like nothing is on Ethereum.org, right? It's all just pointers to other places. So I think the way we have it now is actually pretty good.
Yeah. Anybody else
What
have
was the
comments?
reason that this was rejected the last time?
You mean the move to ethereum.org/EIPs or
Exactly.
so Sam showed us a an example of what it would look like, and it would actually have like it would if you've been to ethereum.org and you go to like here I'll post an example link ethereum.org and then you go to something like uh, where is it individuals or maybe they already have it set up. Oh, here it is. So yeah, so ethereum.org/eips. Right now, this is how it was what it looks like. Like, what is EIPs? What are the history of it, etc. But um, if we were to move the EIPs to ethereum.org/EIPs to where they're searchable in here, it would have that top frame of individuals, developers, enterprise, and Ethereum, and it would feel more like a part of a website than a standards platform. It would have a different feel to it, and it would have a different. It wouldn't feel as professional or technical as what some people were arguing, including Alex Bergzazi.
And I think there were also a lot of SEO implications.
The SEO implications were actually in favor of moving it because we would get more traffic by having it be ethereum.org/EIPs rather than what it is now.
Got it.
Also, I suppose we could integrate EIPs into the Unified Translation Platform. I
Yeah,
don't know if this has been considered.
Yeah, that was another argument for that they could help with translations.
we could do the translations without the integration though, and it wouldn't. I mean, it's not like fitting like a glove when you do that, is my understanding, but I'm not super versed in the way they're doing translations right now. Also, that would be a lot. I don't think they would want to take that on for translating on the go every EIP that comes in. That is something we should strive for sure, but like I don't know if they're going to want to take that on. That would be a question for them.
Even just translating EIP1 would be really hard.
Yeah.
Would be really like as in we don't even know what it all means.
And the wording is like overly technical. Not overly technical for what it is, but overly technical for a translator, I would say, who like would need to like how would you translate EFI, I guess?
Recently, I discovered a script translator on Google.
Oh.
I'm not sure if that would be helpful for this EIP1. I mean, somebody can try that.
Yeah.
I would just say in general you should be very careful with anything automated because like automatic translations are typically like the holy grail, so we're not there yet. That's just my 2 cents.
You're saying it's like rough translation when that happens.
Yeah, I mean like basically the ability to translate effectively between languages is like the goal of like current research and in speech like recognition and stuff. So I find it highly unlikely you'd be able to find one that's actually like usable. You probably just have to get a. You'd probably be better off just putting your effort on like finding a translator. But maybe it's updated since I last checked.
Yeah, or a combination. Do people do combinations? Anybody heard of that? Like they do the auto translate and then have someone come in and clean it up?
The my experience with Japanese is that it's really doesn't work, but that's probably because Japanese is really different.
Hmm.
But overall, I would say the we if I was looking for a translator for EIP1, I would probably want basically a lawyer like level of understanding of language translating, because a lot of weight is given to a lot of these words,
Mm-hmm.
and like not knowing nuance or context to certain things, especially technical ones. Like I know if to be a patent attorney, you have to have a dual degree of law and of engineering, because like specifically because of this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So it would be, I don't know. Anyway, I feel like that's a little bit of distraction, but that would be a very high, very their crowdsourcing EIP1 translations I wouldn't be really comfortable.
So there is this team of translation led by Taeyeon from Ethereum Foundation, and if people find it's worth having the translation of EIP1, we can probably reach out to her and try to get it done.
Yeah. We can definitely get her input on that if we want to do that, but that's probably lower on the priority list overall. We all understand that because we're trying to overhaul the system itself in English. So, any other comments on that and the migration to ethereum.org that isn't really happening right now, except for the added search functionality of the current Jekyll site?
It doesn't. There's still an unsolved problem of their blockers to changes in the EIPs or EIP processes are on then being able to render it on the site. And that's just to say that,
Yeah,
but not to like to go into it. But I'm just noting that that is still then a problem if we aren't having resources in a team for it.
that's true. Yeah, moving it to ethereum.org, we're kind of less independent because, or the EIP process and the EIP Jekyll integration is less independent because then you're relying on cross-link or links to ethereum.org/EIPs and whatever they have set up, whether it's Jekyll or an automatic like markdown grabbing thing that Sam set up, rather than EIPs.ethereum.org, which is just a Jekyll plugin, so it's a little more transparent.
I was meaning the other direction because we don't have anyone looking at the EIP's site, or like if I wanted to have a change to the header file that added in champion, like to the header part where the square is, like added in champion to that, and then you could put one name.
Mm-hmm.
Like there isn't anyone who could make that change on the website.
Got it. Okay.
And it would, and with if it was under the ethereum.org team, then there is a team of people that would be able to keep up with any of those changes. Or if the one we talked about earlier of making it so the EIPs.ethereum.org is like a data availability, like anyway, I don't want to go all the way back into it, but if it was more raw, like it's trying to do both things and it's kind of failing at both of them.
Mm-hmm.
So that's that's an ongoing problem then, and we should mark that and we can talk about it next time.
Yeah, I don't know if we'll solve that one today, but are there any comments on that? Any others? Okay, we'll think on this more for next time, and it's not a pressing one because I don't know if Sam's working on the search integration, it sounds like, but not on any further efforts to move the EIPs there right now. Next up is survey on the EIP process. A blog was released, and I think Edson can talk about that.
Yeah, so a blog was released. There showed up patterns from all responses. So I collected the patterns and wrote statistics on it. I can link the blog below. And do you want to talk about the findings, or should we save that until all the final responses are received? Or we can start working on solutions.
Maybe wait till all of them are received. I don't have a huge preference. What do y'all think?
Whatever Edson wants to do.
Yeah, Edson, it's your call.
I think we could start figuring out a way of solutions, or at least know what the current problems are, and then so we could brainstorm solutions for next meeting.
Okay, sounds good.
So, so the major ones are politics. How can we keep the EIP process apolitical? How can we create a sense of finality? And how can controversial EIPs be introduced? All of these have to do with decision making. So the overall question of how to solve this is, how can we formalize the decision making process for EIPs? How can we create a formal decision making process for EIPs? That's a bigger question because, from my understanding, decision making comes down to governance. So we'd have to create some sort of formal governance structure for deciding what EIPs go through. But just some sort of formal decision making process is one of the biggest need found through the survey.
I think related to that, there's like another conversation about the core devs call and the value they have, and potentially moving them async. I feel like maybe there would be a way to like kill two birds with one stone here. Like we already have, a rough threshold of what it means for EIPs to be implemented, right? It's basically all the client implementers kind of agree to them, and they don't see major objections. and I can imagine us doing that async. I think there's like the political piece. You're never gonna like make controversial EIPs uncontroversial, right? And I feel like if we move things async, where client developers just said whether they're confident or not, implementing this as part of an upgrade, um, and you can kind of leave it the client developers to decide whether or not they want to implement it, which seems to have worked okay so far with ProgBow. Yeah, I feel like you could probably move most of the process async, and by like not having the actual core devs call where the decisions get made, you open it up to more people in the community to like voice their concerns and be part of the conversation. Like this is obviously a pretty huge change, but I feel like it's kind of the way we could kind of kill these two birds with one stone. Yeah, I'm curious what others think.
One more thing about that.
Oh.
One of the individual feedbacks was making less reliant on, like the EIP process, less reliant on live conversations, or like the
Yeah.
protocol.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. Like, I mean, for example, for our team at Pegasus, half the team is in Australia. So, I mean, half the people who are actually core devs have never been on a core devs call because it's just like 2 a.m. for them, and we kind of lose their opinions on that. And Nick Johnson's another good example of, like, I think he's in New Zealand or something, and he doesn't show up, but he would leave really valuable feedback async. So I think there's a lot of value there.
Yeah, I agree. I wrote something really, really, really rough draft of something a week ago that I just dropped off. It was called like Ethereum Constellations, and it was basically a series of chat rooms that were connected through Telegram, Discord, and Gitter, and they were per topic, and there would be kind of like moderate to strict rules on what chat rooms could be created and what their purpose was. But it would be like one of them was for deciding when hard forks would happen, like scheduling, and that would be completely separate from deciding what EIPs go into a hard fork, which is completely separate from the subtopics on EFI EIPs. So, like 1559 is EFI right now, so there would be a topic room on that, and then it would move through the different rooms as it goes through.
Why not use something like Eat Magicians though? I'm a bit skeptical of chat for that because it's just so hard to search and to record decisions. But if we had like, somebody's background noise is really loud.
I have a suggestion here.
Go ahead.
There's Rust language team, core development team that develops the Rust language, and they had this problem where they also have their own process called request for comments, RFCs. So basically, before implementing a change in the language, it should first be adopted as what they call an RFC, and we call this EIP in the Ethereum community. So basically, they used they have GitHub as their primary communications platform on various RFCs, and GitHub didn't really scale as far as I know. But what they did was they tried out Zulip, and Zulip helped them a lot. So Zulip, I'm also kind of trying it out for participating in the Rust language development, and also we are piloting it for Open Ethereum as an alternative to Discord. So basically, it allows you to manage your conversations much more smoothly than you can with Discord. And it's also very easy to search through various topics in the history as compared to Telegram or to Discord, especially Discord. So it seems a lot more organized.
So I think there's maybe two different things here, right? Like one is like the conversational day-to-day chat rooms. But I feel we probably also want something a bit more permanent. And that's why I kind of like Eat Magicians for that, because it's been there for a long time and it's more of like a long form forum than like chat. But like, because if we have to record, say there's a thread about an EIP and we have to record, open Ethereum status, Besu status, get status, Nethermind status. I feel like, yeah, like you want a permanent thread rather than like a chat that people have to scroll up forever. But anyways, I guess I'm not that like strongly opinionated on the tool, but I think there's definitely a way we can do this async.
Yeah, Artem, how do you spell Zulit?
Zulip. Zulip. Let me write that down in chat.
Because yeah, I'd
Have
be
you
interested
all
in looking out that tool for sure.
have you all ever considered using Slack? I've had a great experience with it. I mean, I don't know if it. I mean, it seems to scale really well actually. I'm in a Slack with like 50,000 members, and it's like it works perfectly. So
Huh. Um, because it's closed source and cost money to store messages, that's kind of the deal breaker because someone would have to pay for it.
Zulip is actually Slack on steroids in many respects. So it looks very much like Slack, but it's open source, and more than that, it allows us to have a more fluid threading model that basically divided into where you have channels, but they can also easily be divided into substreams. So basically, streams divided into topics, and you can search. You can list. These topics are listed in the order of the history, and basically you can basically have multiple conversations in the same chat room, but which will be subdivided into topics which are also listed in history. And if for some reason the conversation goes off topic, so like for example you have a general dev chat room, then you have a discussion about, I don't know, one EIP, and then suddenly you start talking about another EIP, then you can easily move that conversation about another EIP into its own separate topic, and it will easily be searchable. It's very easy to reach it, and it will not be lost.
that sounds very, very good.
Few thoughts on this. I've been seeing some of this stuff about separating and doing async and stuff, and I'm wondering if that's from the place of what I've read it as is there is a movement that people would like to see the EIP standardization process be separate from the deployment on what is decided to go into a network upgrade, and that I wonder how much of the try to make an async process is really actually trying to make that happen, like that separation happen. And there are some things that I think that we like the awkward of calls as using strict for EIP standardization, and then for something like EFI, but you have the actual coordination and decisions about what gets deployed being separate, or at least done separately, I think would still be good. And having the calls, there's a couple stuff like having a cadence of the client developers coming together is something I've seen as important, and like cohesion among the clients about what actually is being developed. Like without some way of all the clients coming together and regularly talking about it, I don't really see that like asynchronously really happening very well. It's already hard to keep everyone on the same page. And like one kind of practical example for hard fork coordination or network upgrades, like I actually have zero authority over any client team. Like I have no way of making any of them do anything. So a really useful thing that has happened on the all core dev calls, and just to be really frank about it, is if we identify something publicly and then say like, hey, if I ask what is the status of the implementation of this, and they know every 2 weeks they have to report on it, it's likely to get done. If I don't have any way, I could follow up all day and all night, but without that like collective accountability, I don't see clients really moving together.
So I think there's two bits here, right? One is like the implementation parts. I feel like you could get that mostly async, right? Like, so say we have, I don't know, EIP 2315, there is an ETH Magicians thread. If Besu hasn't begun our implementation, you can kind of add us on that thread, and we can kind of comment. But I think I agree that there's around like the scheduling and whatnot, that's maybe harder to do async. But I don't know. It feels like, yeah, we could probably take most decisions async and get more input from the community, and have the place where the decision is made be async, and then use the calls as a kind of way to resolve these like tricky issues that are just, hard to resolve async. Um, and that's already kind of half what happens, right? Like half the conversation happens in like the GitHub PR for an EIP, and the only part we're kind of missing there is like, you know, for clients adding like a +1 that, okay, this should be accepted. And that doesn't seem that hard to do async, but I agree that like the more fuzzy scheduling is hard.
One comment on that: there has been a need from the survey, or expressed in the survey, for clarity on where the EAP process ends and where the hard fork coordination begins, or at least how those two are separate, like clarifying that part.
On that, I would agree to most of the part of James as well as Tim, in a sense, like right now the process of EIP and the hard work is not actually separated, but in my opinion, the admission is a very good forum. What we can go ahead and do that, in addition to James of ideas of collecting information from individual client, we can also start referring to the point of discussion. And if we kind of make it a preference of having it in ethmagician instead of the PR of that, we would be having collective information at one place. And even if it is async, we are also getting a synced information during the all core dev call. So this is basically a fine line between the hard fork process and the EIP process in itself. And I kind of try to document it sometimes back in one of the EIPs. It must be merged somewhere else, but yeah, I find that this may be a good way forward in which people will be getting the accurate information even about all the clients where they do stand at any point of time.
Okay, so we've kind of agreed that the process of um, hard fork management and EIP development should be separate,
Standardization.
or implementation should be separate, right?
The EIP standardization and the and network upgrade
Deployment. Yeah,
deployment.
should be separate. Okay, so we're all there. We're saying that there might need to be new tools in order to make that happen. We're also saying there might need to be, or that there is value in having some type of asynchronous coordination beyond the all core devs Gitter chat for people who are in different time zones, and that there might be tools we need to bring up to do that. I think I got that all right. Is there anything I got wrong?
Probably we have tools existing. We just need to enforce the acceptance and implementation of that. Like we have a discussion forum, the Magician, where in my understanding, most of the EAPs are there and they are referred to be as a point of discussion. But sometimes what happens, the discussion shifts to the pull request, and there we lost the track. So if we can make a standard process, a standard place that this is it, and this is where you need to go, and we refer the link in all core dev meetings, that might bring all the information at one place.
And that would be a change to EIP1, because in EIP1 we say you should probably use ETH Magicians, but you can use Reddit and issues and other stuff.
Yeah, it's a kind of a recommendation, but I think to make it standardized, enforcement would be required.
Yeah, and I don't think that's a bad thing.
Yeah, I agree with that. This is Jamie. I've dropped in partway through the meeting, but yeah, I think that's actually a really good idea. I've been thinking about that myself, is to have a place where that links to all kinds of different related discussions, but in a single URL. And it can be per EIP or per meta EIP, hard fork EIP. It's definitely, I'm not sure where you would put such a URL or such a resource, but it's important because there's even Gitter chat links, and there's just so many places where decisions are being made or discussions are happening.
Yes.
It can be per EIP in the beginning, like because the meta EIP for any upgrade would be like the next step. So we can start with going individual EIP wise, and then we can also create a thread for meta EIP, and we can bring all those EIPs. I mean, just the link over here, and discussion should be at one place with the EIPs only. I mean, that's my thought process.
I had a question in general. Previously, we were talking about governance in the Telegram, and the consensus we got to was that thinking about an entire governance overhaul would be a process that might take a few years and require funding for research. I had an idea of probably creating the president for having an upgradable governance structure, so we can make changes now and then upgrade them later with more formally through research and stuff like that. What do you guys think about that?
Would that be
Did
in
you
the
s-
form of an EIP, or would that just be something we do?
So that would be in the form of an EIP. I guess it might be either information or meta. It just would be a proposal for upgradable governance structure, and then we can extend that with how frequently should the governance be reviewed to be upgraded. I was thinking maybe through decay. So early on it would be more frequent, and then later on it'd be less frequent.
did you say something about determining a president?
As in making an expectation that,
Precedent.
yeah, like an expectation that
Oh, precedent, not the president of the United States, or yeah, okay.
no president,
Oh, sorry.
like an expectation.
I wanted to say, I mean, if I might kind of be unaware of a lot of this, but my take on it is that a lot of the cryptocurrency stuff works on the idea of general like sovereignty, right? And like decentralization. And I remember that we were talking before about the like the nodes, like the node holders that make like the clients that make the final push, and decide whether or not a change is made. Um, have you considered giving them like more governance than say the core devs, that kind of thing?
We've talked about that before. That's a really good point to bring up, actually. So we've talked about that before, and the main, or from my recollection, the number one issue when I've had conversations with people about that is getting participation, and the fact that there are groups of like enterprise node operators, like in Fira, who have multiple nodes, like maybe hundreds of nodes they run, and they can single-handedly sway discussion or decisions.
That makes total sense. I mean, I think I really like the way that the U.S. government is set up, in the sense that you have like different. I mean, I guess it's more complex, and so we get back to the problem that somebody was talking about as far as like a big overhaul. But how they have like multiple different checks and balances, and then like you have, for example, the node like the people or the node controllers, and then you have like the core devs that say have the opportunity um, to like veto or something like that.
Yeah.
But
I think,
one way to think
yeah,
about it is that it's up to them to organize. And the people at the table now are the ones who are organized and engaged and interested enough to be a part of the governance process. And if a group wants to be a part of the system, they could come to the table, and I don't think there's anything stopping them. And when there's a problem, a group coalesces, converges around it, like what happened um, with the cat herders. Like there were some there needed to be more management of the releases, and so they coalesced around it. They formed a group, and the same goes for if miners or node operators or any group out there wants to participate in the process, it's up to them to organize, and we would help them organize. I think all of us who are involved in the process would help them organize. So rather than form a legal structure or any kind of ideal structure, it's almost like just let those parties be involved and encourage them to do so, and then much like what's happening here, formalize it a little bit, but don't go formal first. Is basically what I'm saying. Just encourage people to organize if they want to have agency in it or be a part of the process.
So I guess my suggestion was create, say we're open to upgrading our governance structure, but not necessarily going into like the details of what, and then like going through the entire overhaul right at once. I was thinking of doing small changes now and then making larger changes later on. What do you guys think?
I have to think about it more.
So my take on the slow output would be that's definitely, in my opinion, a good idea. I think it would be good to always test things, and also treat it like it's a financial transaction, maybe, in the sense that like Hudson was saying, that you can expect the worst and expect like a certain node group to coalesce and take over. So going slowly would be beneficial, because if the current system is stable, then you don't want to jeopardize that. That's my take on it. And then also another thing I liked was the suggestion of like the core like governance structure as it exists right now, if it exists at all. I'm unfortunately not too aware of it, but if it exists, then they help like smaller groups coalesce as they want to get involved. And I think that that's a good idea.
One thing might also be helpful is to define what governance means. So the way I'm using it in this, like for what I'm saying, is just decision making, just the formal way of how decisions are made. And so for us, it would be for hard fork coordination.
So if I may, I mean, like this is mostly relevant for the potentially contentious EIPs, as far as I understand, like ProcPow. And so there's two things here. First is that many or most EIPs are purely technical and do not carry any like social implications. So they're maybe of little interest to the most of the community, for the most stakeholders, only to client developers. But then there are social, so to speak, EIPs like ProcPow again, which are of interest to everyone. And second, I think that it's just important to get visibility to social EIPs, basically. And if we get enough visibility for them, then there will be no more divisions or no more scandals like ProcPow. So that's my take.
I agree with like what you say about the bit of like most EIPs are not like that divisive. I think the challenge there though is you want the system to be set up in advance and to handle all of the non-controversial EIPs, so that when we have a controversial EIP, the system is already there. Because for ProgPal, for example, if we introduce a new system now, people just won't think it's legitimate, because like say we introduce a new system and the system results in ProgPal going live on the network, everybody who's against ProgPal says it's a bad system, and vice versa. If we introduce a new system and ProgPal doesn't go live, everybody that's pro ProgPal says it's a bad system. So this is why I think it would be really valuable to come up with a more open system that works in these non-controversial cases that we can start using and get some actual traction on. And then once the next controversial thing comes along, you already have that system in place and you don't have to put it up as you're dealing with the controversy.
I definitely agree with that. Just seconded. So
Yeah, that
And
makes a
also-
lot of sense. That approach is be prepared for the crazy things by creating a process for the normal things.
And it looks like we have
So
about 30 seconds left. So last thought.
no, I don't
I
want to
have
end
a
it.
lot of. I have a lot.
Visibility. Visibility is paramount here. Like we need to work on getting visibility to potentially controversial EIPs.
My read is the core problem is that the Ethereum community doesn't feel like they have a say what goes into Ethereum. And I think a lot of this trying to figure out different ways of doing governance is a long way of getting around to that, and smaller changes to do smaller things. Like we're a group of 10 people on a call right now trying to get governance buy-in for any governance changes is like we could do whatever, we could write whatever we want right now, but then how in the world are we going to get the entire network to agree with it? And how are we even going to know when the entire network agrees with it? Like I don't, maybe I'm just like a little more pessimistic than usual.
Yeah, it's always going to be rough. I think it's always going to be rough. Like if you watch British Parliament on YouTube, like, you know, it's difficult to form a government or have governance. But I think overall we should expect there to be conflict. And when there is, it's a natural thing. And, you know, we do our best to try to address it. And I think those structures are existing, and, you know, like was said before, just slowly proceed with it.
So I have two things. Number one is that we shouldn't assume, or we should assume that every sort of governance change will lead to catastrophic failure. So you should only implement changes that, with catastrophic failure, wouldn't destroy the network. Like for example, if somebody passed an EIP that like devalued the entire currency, and like that's sort of, you know, and as far as I can tell, that is like a feasible thing if they took over and like whatever, right? I mean, and then number two is when you're like, I personally don't understand how people can say that you can have a governance structure of any kind to make changes to something, especially when it has to do with money, without politicizing it. Personally, I don't see how that's possible. As I understand Bitcoin, they just don't make changes, or
Yeah, Bitcoin's very stagnant. So yeah, we're a minute or two over, and I have to get on another Zoom call, which means I have to end this one for my account to do that. So sorry about that, everyone, and let's take this back to the Telegram chat and see you all in 2 weeks.
Thanks, Hudson.
Thanks everyone for coming. Bye.
All right, see ya.
Thank you, everyone.